So what we've got to share with you today is our introduction to the Accelerated Replacement Scorecard. I've got myself, Scott Fable with CIT, and John Caffrey from CIT here to discuss. This is something we wanted to create in response to some implementers we know are having to transition to offering projects in custom, where they may have previously been working in the Deem space, and also those implementers that have, project developers that have been used to providing custom projects, have basically over time asked CIT to provide more guidance around how we decide whether a project is eligible for the accelerated replacement, previously called early retirement, been able to make that claim as opposed to just using a normal replacement measure type. Essentially, there's an extra set of documentation and evidence that one needs to provide to prove that the project is being accelerated, that in other words, the customer was not likely to conduct this project on a normal timeline for them, but that actually, because of the program, we have done something to move up their timetable, either because they weren't planning to do it at all, or because their timing of it would have had it to happen at some point in the future, and we're actually making it happen a lot sooner. This is not replacing anything. This is actually a new document that is, again, in draft form. We are wanting to make it a living document that we update over time, and it's a tool. So this will make it easier to understand how does CIT regard the different kinds of situations that you might encounter with a customer and the evidence of that situation, the documentation of that situation, how those weigh relative to one another. The idea being that if you can look at the evidence that you've collected or the situation that you've learned from the customer, does that situation, just on the face of it, be more in favor or more against an accelerated replacement claim? And this table is there to help you assess, what is the rubric that CIT uses? What is the commission the CPSC used to think about these sorts of things? Basically, this is our culmination of all the input and feedback we've gotten from the commission over time. With that, you might be able to find opportunities to collect new and different kinds of information that maybe you hadn't been able to before that provide stronger evidence in favor of accelerated replacement. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, and I'm going to let him kind of take the wheel, so to speak, of leading us through this and showing connections between the various elements of the document. So take it away, John.
Great, thanks. So for accelerated replacement projects, we are looking at viability and influence, and the scorecard format separates those into two categories, and we need to score positive in both the viability and the influence to claim accelerated replacement. And so in this viability section, we've got two rows. One is the age of the equipment is younger than the EUL -1, and that's because we have to have 1 year of savings claim at least. So that's why we're looking at EUL -1. And then we've also got the operation, which is your alternate remaining useful life, which is most applicable when the system is older than the EUL, or the EUL, the DEER standard effective useful life has already passed. So we've got examples of what is strong, moderate, and corroborative evidence for supporting the age of your system. And in strong evidence, we've got invoices, nameplate, manufacturer date with serial, or manufacturer date in the nameplate, serial number. That's your hard evidence of the system age. Sometimes we see a spec sheet with an approximate date range, and so we put that in moderate. And for for corroborative, you've got circumstantial evidence, such as if the site did a facility renovation in a particular area, and it's likely they also replaced that piece of equipment during that renovation, then you know pretty well. That's probably the age of the system. And if we have an older system, then we need to focus in the operation side to show, well, it's an old system, but they did a rebuild or a pattern of rebuilds defining a longer life than the Deere standard EUL, or maybe it's a repair eligible, repair indefinitely kind of system where the rebuild, happened 3 years ago, and they typically do the rebuild every 7 years. So you've got proof, even though the system may be 30 years old, you've got that evidence of the operation supporting viability. Then we've got the influence section has 5 categories. Go down below. We've got customer outreach, which is discussing who contacted who. We've got more program influence if the program reaches out to the customer, and less influence if the customer reaches out to the program. And it's an indicator based on the outreach how curious we are about maybe why the customer reached out. So customer reaching out isn't a very negative aspect of it, but it does bring up some more questions when we're looking at a project package. So the pre-ridership screening, which is required for all projects, but is also interesting to look at when the customer reaches out. So the pre-ridership screening, where the program talks to the customer about what they're planning to do and when they plan to do it, what their reasons are for choosing a particular technology, and then seeing if we can move them, setting that benchmark of where we started with the customer, so then we can offer a more efficient option, try and accelerate when they're planning to do a replacement, et cetera. And so how we prove our pre-ridership screening is in this pre-ridership screening row. So if we document our conversation, we put that in as a corroborative piece. And if it's documented in an email conversation where you've got the customer having written out a little bit more about what they were planning on doing or what they're thinking, where their starting point is, we put that as a moderate, and high influence being, or a high point value being for having a customer CapEx plan or equivalent showing what they plan to do and when they plan to do it. We also have categories for technical assistance, projects that are identified in a large integrated audit or a retro-commissioning study or equivalent are strong influence. It ties in closely with like customer outreach, but they're a bit different. So the customer may be interested in having energy services and reach out to us, but they might not know what they want to do, or they might be looking at a particular system or project and invite us on site, and while on site, we are able to identify other measures. So that's where this technical assistance and identifying the measure is somewhat redundant, but has some differences. Also in technical assistance, sometimes we see projects where it's a unknown technology, or the application of that technology has an unknown effect or savings on a system. And so if we show the customer wasn't at a point where they could make a decision because they didn't know if it was feasible, and our interaction helps bridge that gap, then that also falls into the 2-point category there for technical assistance. The financial row is a gauge that we can look at from the project page incentive information. So typically when we're looking at a project, if it's a really long payback, like 10 years or more, there's something else that's typically driving the project. There may be a combination of drivers, but if the payback is long, it's an indicator that there's probably another reason why this project is being installed. And so we tend to take a closer look at what the non-energy benefits are, if that's the case. And then if the project payback is short, a year or less, it's an indicator that it might be a standard practice. And so we look more at that side. And so what this row is trying to show is if the payback doesn't make too much sense as an energy project, it still could be caused by the program, but we're looking more closely at those other reasons. The maybe technical assistance or the retro-commissioning study is the reason the project is happening. Maybe the customer decision criteria is not the standard decision making in the industry, and so there's points for that can outweigh a very long or a very short payback.
So that takes us through the document. I think also you had mentioned to me before that you'd like to share with the group maybe some of the connections about the different rows, about how, like, if you're finding one area is not so strong, how you can use another part of the scorecard to help balance that.
Yeah, so the viability side has the most direct connection. If your system is old, then the operation needs to show an alternate RUL for that system. The influence, there are connections between how the customer reaches out or how the program reaches out, and then the need to, prove that customer's decision criteria. So the customer outreach and, well, I guess all 5 rows are somewhat tied together. Depending on how the project is started, it will really determine how deep we need to go into customer decision-making criteria. If it's something the customer reached out and they've got an identified scope, and it's really, the project is caused by the customer knowing there's an incentive and seeking out this measure at their site, then we have to show that their decision-making wouldn't, or needs to prove they wouldn't have installed that measure without the incentive money. So that's how these are tied together. Our goal with the scorecard is for projects that are caused by the program to have them pass. We've seen quite a few project examples, and so we're trying to compile that information, the experience of looking at those projects into a concise form to be a job aid, some examples of things we've seen. And we want to tie in links on how to go about doing things like the free ridership screening, for example, and bring in more of those job aids. It helps us, or we invite everyone to bring project examples that you have so we can discuss them and add more information to the scorecard, or change the information on the scorecard, rebalance it. At the end of the day, we're trying to provide support for projects that the program caused, the program accelerated, and make that open for everybody to see.
So we invite everybody that's listening in to offer your questions and comments. While you're on the webinar today, you can do that by typing in your question into the chat box, and we'll answer those as they come in. And then in a little bit, I'll also explain how you can provide feedback on an ongoing basis after today. One of the questions that we've received is, does this scorecard, is it intended to replace items that are available today, such as the ARQ, Accelerated Replacement Questionnaire, that's used for direct-to-sell projects and with the MLC and or custom light?
So this is intended to be a job aid for custom projects. This is how the CIT group looks at projects when we're doing a review at the pre-install review. So we encourage this to be supplemental information for how people are developing projects. There's this is building on the Track 1 working group scorecard, which had some examples. This has a few more examples than that scorecard.
But in general, I think at the moment we're not asking for folks to have to change their process, but rather this is more of a tool that helps supplement or help.
Yeah.
You know, if there's a situation where they're not able to show in their current practice readily whether accelerated replacement is possible. We had another question about, like, during project development, how do we foresee this being used, and should it be submitted somehow with the project documentation?
Yeah, I see this as being used to help project developers write up their accelerated replacement claim. I don't foresee us needing to have it printed out and circled which boxes. I more see it as something, the examples in these boxes that project developers can point to for how they're weighing the evidence for and against.
In general, for custom projects, is there an overall positive score we're looking for?
Yes.
And this is referring, for those that didn't know it, by the way, we didn't explicitly point this out. At the top, we do have, at the top of each column, a point value that could help you when looking at all the pieces of evidence you have to kind of add together their relative values.
Yeah. Yeah, so we range from +3 to -3, and viability and influence need to have positive scores, and we don't add up a score for both sections. It's we add up the score for viability and separately add up the score for influence. And the reason behind that is we need to have the influence part is the customer wasn't planning to do the project, and the viability part is the system has life in it where this, regardless of what the customer was planning, that system could also continue to operate. So that's why they're separate.
What is, or I should say, who fills in this scorecard? Is this expected to be the project developer, the tech reviewer, the customer?
Oh, this is the project developer. So parts of this are, with the preponderance of evidence format, the project developer is supposed to weigh evidence for and against, and these questions, some of the proof is about how did you, screen the customer system to make sure that it had life, even if, the customer plans to use it for a long time. Like, what part did we screen in the age to show it could operate for a while into the future? And for the influence piece, especially, it's what was the customer's starting point before the program involvement? Were they planning to do a project in the next year, or how did we screen to see what their plans were to prove that the program is causing that project? So the audience for this is project developers.
And I'll add that it was our intent at CIT to create something that reflected the way that we look at these projects as well, so that it would be easier for project developers to understand how we think about these respective categories, essentially based on the feedback we've received from the Commission ex-ante review team historically. There was a question, just to clarify, so if folks are adding together their point values, the intent is that a project could be considered accelerated replacement if the viability section comes out positive, and the lower influence section comes out positive when you add, or sorry, program influence section altogether comes out positive.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay. So this is, again, thinking of it as a tool. You're using it to help judge the evidence that you've collected to date, whether it will help you make a case for viability and program influence on accelerated replacement. Also point out that in general this is a tool to help you decide if a project is appropriate for accelerated replacement versus a normal replacement. You may still need to document that there was influence to do this project as a whole, that the customer wasn't already planning to do this work on their own without the program or the incentive. The scorecard, someone asked if the scorecard, when an effective date is, this is available today, and you are welcome to use it in any projects now that it's available. This is again, because this is a tool, we do not require it. We just offer it up as a helpful resource to assess whether the evidence that you've collected on your project, when you're assembling that evidence as a project developer, whether it's adequately in favor of both the viability and program influence evidence or in favor of accelerated replacement. We had, if I may switch to the next topic, the next question was about repair indefinitely projects. How would they be assessed here, given that those might be equipment that exceed their normal UL?
So we're looking for records of a recent system rebuild, pattern of rebuilds, or subcomponent rebuilds. That's the operation cells that the cursor is hovering over right now, that show even though the age of the system is beyond its EUL, there is still life because of those rebuilds.
So that, I think, is a good example of what you were touching on earlier, John, that if you have a situation where the equipment is old, and therefore this first row would score that as a negative, then that's an opportunity to say, okay, I need something to show that I need more evidence that will show that there's actually remaining useful life, and so this row shows you what some of those things might be to help offset that. I presume then if somebody comes up with evidence that all cancels out, so to speak, and you add all the numbers together and you get a 0, that's still not thought of as
correct.
Favor of, right?
It needs to be a positive score, one or more.
Okay.
And if there's a specific project that we feel is caused by the program and has evidence of life in the system that's not reflected in this scorecard, I would like to talk about it and see how we can build out this resource more.
We had a question about payback. Is it payback at the measure level or for the whole project?
Measure level.
At the measure level, okay. And is that because the measure type is set at the measure level?
Because measures have to qualify individually.
Okay. That's a good point, I think, to help bring up is that if your project has some items might qualify as accelerated replacement and some might not. That doesn't disqualify the project necessarily, it's just you have to treat some as an accelerated replacement and then some separately as some other measure type.
Yeah.
Okay. This is did have a question just how, on what kinds of projects might use this. I think my impression has always been that we're developing this to be generally available to all custom projects which have a customized calculation. Sometimes that was called calculated projects in the past, but essentially custom refers to things that aren't deemed measures for the work paper. However, there may be other tools that folks are using that they don't, this doesn't, again, replace any of those. This is just allowing a rubric of sorts, a guide to whether the evidence collected supports accelerated replacement and not just normal replacement. We did have a question about the small medium business programs, SMB programs, previously called regional DI. There was a question about whether the ARQ will be updated or changed because this is now available. I can share that that is something that we're exploring with the regional SMB team, with the public SMB team, and that's forthcoming. We don't have a time just yet of when that will come out. In the meantime, you're able to continue using the ARQ as you have been. For projects that are not going through custom light workflow, but just a full custom project, just keep in mind that you would still need, even if you use the ARQ, we may still require evidence of influence, and if it's an accelerated replacement project, the sorts of things that we ask for here in the scorecard. So we're running up against the end of our time. I really appreciate everyone's participation today. So let me tell you how we would like to receive more feedback over time to help us improve on this. And we have received some feedback already from folks that have seen this on the wiki page. The way that you can send that feedback to us is at citcommunications@pge.com. That's citcommunications@pge.com. That's one way. You can email that to us, feedback on the scorecard, or if you have any questions, you're welcome to do that. We will send a follow-up announcement when the recording for this webinar is available, just letting people know it's there. We'll include this information about how to contact us there as well. CIT does continue to hold office hours every day, Monday through Friday, 9 to 10. And we also encourage folks that are developing a full custom project. As part of our process, we do welcome an early review, which means that through Energy Insight, submit the project into Energy Insight, and then send a task to John Caffrey for an early review of your project, and we can look at evidence you've collected to date and work through the scorecard with you if you like, show you how it would score, and talk through any alternatives you might have for gathering additional evidence that would support your case. We encourage that. That would come before you submit the package officially. We encourage that so that you have an opportunity to both learn how to work with the scorecard, but also get some early on guidance for projects so that it can hopefully go down a positive and successful path as you continue to develop the project. Again, early review is available for all custom projects. So with that, I'm going to close. I appreciate your time today. We look forward to speaking with you again, and we encourage you to take a look at our wiki page for accelerated replacement and for CIT, where we have additional resources around recordings that we've had in the past on influence and other custom-related topics. Thank you very much, and we'll talk soon.